Autopsy is today on the Las Vegas Raiders. They're 2-11 right now.
Pretty dead.
Yes.
Yeah.
Currently in line for the number 1 overall pick at this very moment. If the season ended today,
Very dead.
Raiders are number 1 overall. So, cause of death for the Las Vegas Raiders, and we'll give it a little hope coming out of it as well.
Yeah.
At the end.
I mean, real cause of death. It's sort of, I think it's a coin flip between the inability to find a quarterback over the last couple of years, right? They've been in position for quarterbacks and haven't come away with them. They've been kind of jumped by other teams or haven't been aggressive enough or just haven't made it happen. Or the giving of a second chance as head coach to Josh McDaniels. I would argue, the worst head coach in the NFL over the last several decades, twice. Like, remember, he took over the Denver Broncos.
Urban Meyer is the worst head coach, perhaps in NFL history. It's right up there with Lou Holtz, who didn't last the season. But
imagine somebody giving
like
Urban Meyer another shot in 10 years' time and him doing the same thing again, right? Like, that's what we're talking about with Josh McDaniels here. You listen to anybody who talks about his time with the Denver Broncos. His players can't stand him. Brandon Marshall hates the guy. They all talk about him as being terrible at just basic interpersonal relations. You know, they're like, yeah, he's got a great brain for X's and O's, right? The game plan was always on point, but everybody hated him, right? It's like, that's kind of a problem for that job. They're like, well, he was one of the youngest head coaches ever, you know, plucked from the Bill Belichick system. Like, that's got to be a weird environment to leave and then go into a new, like, it's understandable, right? But he's had 10, 15 years to sit back, to watch this, to learn from his mistakes, to, you know, understand where his failings were. I'm sure the second time will be different. And it wasn't. The second time was exactly the same as the first time, including the same level of disaster, only that team wasn't coming from as high starting point as the Denver Broncos were when he drove the franchise off a cliff. And it was just a train wreck. And okay, yes, he did stop short of actually kicking his own players, which probably differentiates him from Urban Meyer. But it's right there. It was close.
I think Urban's still in his own tier. We got to be careful, you know, 3013. You never know how many coaches are going to become our colleagues here any day here. So you got to be careful who we're talking about. But you're right, McDaniels wasn't good at
careful.
We're not good at careful at all. Could be a guest on the show soon. But I think there's elements of that. I think there's a little bit of what we said with the Giants, where it was kind of this overachieving year that was fake. I mean, the whole McDaniels regime, it was this halfway in between. Are we rebuilding or are we trading for Davante Adams? I think it was, like I said with the Giants, I think it was Indecision years ago that the Raiders, who, if you objectively look at their roster 3 years ago, post-Gruden Mayock era, it wasn't good. It was not a good roster.
Right.
And they said, let's go get Davante Adams. And half their moves were like, let's rebuild, and half were let's compete now. And I think we're seeing the fruit of that. I will say the other cause of death for the Raiders this year, not necessarily in record, but at least in hope, is the Atlanta Falcons, who they play this week on Monday Night Football. The Atlanta Falcons drafting Michael Penix Jr. and leaving the Raiders out of the quarterback musical chairs during the draft. Now, they got Brock Bowers, and I think that's going to end up being a positive in the end. But if you're talking about hope for this year, the Raiders could still be 2-11, but if they had J.J. McCarthy on the roster or had Bo Nix or had Michael Penix, you would say, hey, at least they've got a quarterback, and they're starting this rebuild. I do believe in the long run, maybe it ends up better, that they have Bowers, who looks like a generational tight end, and they'll have a Shedeur Sanders, a Cam Ward, or whoever they end up. I think in the long run, maybe it ends up fine. But I think as far as this year's hope, it's like they came out of last year's draft without the quarterback. They double bridge quarterback in Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. O'Connell's shown some stuff, but I still think you're going to lean into him as a future backup. So I think a lot of those things added up for the Raiders. And then you have the Antonio Pierce thing, which again, I've been, future 33rd team colleague here, I'm sure. I've been vocal about Antonio Pierce, and the job that he did as an interim coach looked good relative to the McDaniels disaster that you highlighted, but maybe shouldn't have set him up for the actual full-time job.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's McDaniel. Like, McDaniel caused the other things. I think they wanted a quarterback in the last couple of years and just didn't find themselves in a position for it. 2023 in particular, right? That was the year where they're picking 7 overall. You've got 4 quarterbacks people are talking about before the draft. Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, Anthony Richardson, and then Will Levis. Levis slipped out of the first round, so you can say, okay, they just didn't like Levis, as apparently did a lot of other teams not like him. And the other 3 were gone in the first 4 picks, right? So at pick number 7, they might have been thinking one of those guys should be available at the back end of the top 10. And they weren't. Now, you can criticize them for not being super aggressive like Carolina and going to get the guy at the top that they liked. But I think you can also say it's look what Carolina had to give up to make that happen. That was damaging. It cost everybody their jobs before they started to piece a bank together again this year. I think it's a reasonable thing to say it was too rich. They didn't want to do it. But it meant that you didn't have a quarterback, and you came out of that draft with, Tyree Wilson as your number 1 pick, Michael Mayer after that. And then this year, same kind of thing, right? They're picking 13. They don't get a quarterback. They go Brock Bowers instead. And it's the same deal, right? There's 6 quarterbacks this time going that first 12 picks. Before, they must have been thinking at least one of those guys might be available where we're picking, let's not go crazy. And they didn't. They sat there and waited. Whether or not they liked any of those guys or not, who knows? But, you come out of it with a tight end and then offensive lineman, you still don't get the quarterback. So
that's why I'm torn on it. As great as Bowers has been, he's great, and they're 2-11, right? But that's going to look better once they have someone they can trust under center, build some other pieces around it.
But ultimately, it all circles back to the big swing they took, franchise-wise, institutionally, was Josh McDaniels is going to be the future. He's the guy. We waited. We saw him for 10 years in New England. He figured it all out. He's the guy that's going to recover us from the mess of the John Gruden, Mike Mayock debacle, the way that ended. Josh McDaniels the guy. And it was a train wreck. And now you had to go with the interim head coach. Whether or not you had to, you're stuck in that awkward situation. You haven't got the quarterback for a couple of years. I think the mess all circles back to that decision.
Is Dave Ziegler guilty as well? He came over. He was the package deal with McDaniels. They got rid of both of those guys.
Yeah, he always felt like just the, Josh McDaniels front man. You know what I mean? Like the sidekick, just the guy that was there with Josh McDaniels to make it work.
Yeah.
I feel like McDaniels was the decision they made, and then Ziegler's just the guy they're hiring with him.
So look, it's to me, it's similar to the Giants, where I haven't thought that the roster was good for a while, but they've had a couple of years of overachieving and overachieving, mostly with Derek Carr as the quarterback. Right. A couple of years ago, they did it with Derek Carr. Last year, they did it with Aiden O'Connell at times. I think the overachieving kind of hurt. It didn't get to that full gut it and rebuild. Even this offseason, bringing in Christian Wilkins as a big free agent signing, but they've got more to do. So 8 draft picks this year. Some dead money still. Oh, just to touch on really quick, the Davante Adams trade, as I mentioned, that was like when McDaniels and Ziegler took over, the Raiders on paper looked like the worst team in that division in the AFC West that's owned by the Kansas City Chiefs. And they said, no, we're not the worst team. We're going to go get Davante Adams and compete. So, because remember, in 2021, they made the playoffs.
Yeah, and I don't even hate.
And I thought but that's what I mean. Like, to me, that's like the Giants. It was a false positive overachievement in 2021. They weren't really a playoff team, and I think we saw that in 22 and 23. Say what you want about McDaniels. They overachieved in 21, and they came back down to earth in 22 and 23, or 22 in particular, and they came back down to earth this year again after some positives last year. That's the issue. I think the underlying roster has not been good for a while, much like the Giants roster has not been good for a while, despite the one overachieving year in 2022.
Maybe, but 2022, so I don't have a problem actually with the Davante Adams trade. I think that was an aggressive move to try and get the most out of a Derek Carr. But midway through that season, they then decided, actually, we're going to move on from Derek Carr. We're going to shut him down so we don't risk guaranteed money. And the reason we brought Davante Adams over here is now null and void. So you make this huge splash move, which kind of commits you to the quarterback you had that had been of the Kirk Cousins world of like, you're good, you're not great, you're sort of arguably trapping the franchise at this level. But at the point, the Davante Adams deal is an endorsement of that as a concept, right? Like, it's like if the Vikings at some point had said, okay, we need to go, like, instead of drafting Justin Jefferson, if they'd gone, we need to go trade for Tyreek Hill, right? The second you do that, you are committing to Kirk Cousins. Like those things go hand in hand. You can't do that and then go, now we've decided this is too much, right? So the second they made that Davante Adams deal, I think that was effectively endorsing the idea of Derek Carr may be limited. He's not Patrick Mahomes, but he is our guy. Yeah. We're going to try and find ways to win with him. And instead, halfway through the next year, they're like, you know what? We're getting rid of him. We're going to start over. You're like, what?
And then when they go with Jimmy Garoppolo in 2023, last year, it was him and Aiden O'Connell. And Garoppolo, I think, was an afterthought, right?
Yeah. It's 2 years of not getting the replacement.
They supposedly loved C.J. Stroud. I don't know where those rumors came from, but they supposedly loved C.J. Stroud. Couldn't go up and get it. Like, to your point, they just missed on a whole bunch of quarterbacks. Even they were in the Aaron Rodgers sweepstakes, right? They were in on a whole bunch of quarterbacks and always landed on Jimmy Garoppolo as a bridge quarterback, or in the case this year, Gardner Minshew as a bridge quarterback with Aiden O'Connell battling him for the starting job. So I think all of the quarterback stuff ended up not going their way.
Yeah.
So they're still in that mix.
But again, it all circles back to they made the decision randomly mid-season to be like, you know what, I've had enough of Derek Carr. He's out of here.
Yeah.
Which, again, is an exact retread of what McDaniels did in Denver. You know what?
Just took him longer to move on from
Jay Cutler. I've had enough. Get rid of him.
They got rid of him like day one, right?
I want Tim Tebow. But it's like, yeah, same idea. Like you had a quarterback of a certain level, and very quickly on, McDaniels decided he's not my guy. I'm going in a different direction. And it was the inability to find the next guy that caused him problems, right? In Denver, it was you bring in Tim Tebow as the solution. With the Raiders, it's 2 years of not being able to get the next guy because you were high but not high enough to get him. And so you have to bridge with Jimmy Garoppolo. You have to bridge with Gardner Minshew. That's the mess. But it all circles back to McDaniels' decisions.
All right, shout out to intern Anthony, who's done a lot of great work and research to help us out preparing for this. The Raiders have almost $30 million in dead cap, 8 draft picks, including 2/3. 1/3 is coming from the Jets in the Davante Adams trade. What are your thoughts on where the Raiders go and how they turn things around?
Yeah, so the good news is this time they have a ton of cap space and theoretically right now the top pick in the draft. So you couldn't be set up better effectively to be rebuilding from scratch. They are second, I think, in overall cap space next year projected, third in effective cap space because we're talking some of that dead money. The only team in a better cap situation effectively is the Patriots, who have already hit that reset button and have their quarterback. So I guess question number one is, I suspect I know where you're leading on this, are you keeping Antonio Pierce as head coach?
I'm just saying he might be a colleague in a few weeks.
Well, now you have the decision.
I would not.
You would not keep him?
No.
You're moving
on.
I
see the chat talking about Mike Vrabel.
Mike Vrabel.
I am very intrigued by second chance Mike Vrabel.
Yeah.
And I would bring him in for every interview, and I do want to know how much. I'm not saying he's got to read spreadsheets or anything, but he was forward thinking in how he managed games anyway. I want to know how well he's going to interact with the nerds. And if he can get along with the nerds, I think Mike Vrabel could be a great leader of men for my franchise.
I think you can broaden that to just other humans in the building.
Or other humans generally.
Michael, are you going to be an asshole again? Because that appeared to be a problem in your last stop.
I'd be intrigued by a Vrabel Raiders connection here.
All right, so step number one to fixing the team is you're letting go of Antonio Pierce. Thank you for stepping in, doing a great job as an interim.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you appear to have been found out as the actual head coach. We're going in a different direction, Antonio. So you're letting go of him, and then you're hiring potentially Mike Vrabel, assuming he's not an asshole.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that's our first job done. Then you've got a ton of cap space.
We're going to draft the quarterback in round 1 here.
Who are you drafting? Let's assume you have the number one overall pick.
Finish my evaluations here. Again, I'm going to be as soft as anybody on QB evaluations because nobody knows anything. But it's either Cam Ward or Shedeur as of right now.
Okay, so the Shedeur thing, I'm going to give you the rest of the time to watch the tape. From not having to watch the tape, to me, my biggest concern of Shedeur is the other stuff. I think he's QB1 in this draft on the field, and I have no idea if I want him as my franchise quarterback or not because of the whole ephemera around him. Deion, the attitude, the entitlement, all this kind of stuff, right?
Are we
do you want Deion, or do you want Shedeur and Deion as your...
I mean, are you going to get the rumors that Deion's going to leave Colorado if the Raiders have the number 1 overall pick and
Deion as the coach?
that they're going to be a package deal? Are you going to get that?
Would you hire Deion?
I don't think I would.
Is that a different answer?
Again, I don't know. Like, I'm not trying to cop out here. I don't know. I would have to sit down and figure it out. I will say, if you told me, hey, Deion's going to have success at Colorado with 3 years of coaching experience, that's unlikely.
Is he more or less likely to be a good NFL coach with his son at quarterback?
I mean, I think it's easier to do that at the college level than at the NFL level. So less likely.
Less.
But there's a lot.
Unless his son's really, really good.
The reason why I was questioning Antonio Pierce is like the CEO nature of the job. It's a very difficult job. Can you handle all of it when you don't have that experience? To this point, it seems like Deion has been able to handle a lot on his plate as the CEO, head coach of Colorado in a portal era. Can you do that at the NFL? You've got cap, you've got different things that you're dealing with.
It's also a very...
And you have a GM that you're interacting with. You're not the star in the team building effort like you are in college.
It becomes a very different dynamic as well, whereas Jackson State and then Colorado, I mean, his son is unquestionably the best quarterback there and one of the best players on the roster and a reason that they're going to be winning games, right? All that is entirely debatable once you hit the NFL. What happens?
It's also Deion he attracted Travis Hunter to Jackson State because he's Deion Sanders.
Sure.
You might have that with free agents at the NFL level, but not at the same way that you can bring college recruits in.
But one of the biggest differentiating factors will be what happens if your son is not amazing right out of the box, right? If he's not unquestionably immediately the best quarterback you have and a guy that's going to be a difference maker for your team, how do you handle that? How do you get him to that spot? Because this is, I mean, the coaching job it's a very different coaching job, right? Trying to get a guy like Bryce Young. Bryce Young in Alabama looks amazing, carving up everybody, overcoming the height thing, and then year one in the NFL, it's like, this dude, what are we even doing here? This guy looks like a high school player, been thrown into an NFL game. This can't work. And it's been a very difficult process involving multiple staffs to try and get him back on his feet. And honestly, I think a huge part of that is quite lucky. Like they basically pulled the plug, and that did have a rebooting effect on Bryce Young, which I think was probably more luck than design by that team. Point being, if Shedeur Sanders rocks up and as a rookie struggles badly, I don't know how Deion's fixing that.
I might lean to the Cam Ward superstar. I mean, if I'm the Raiders and I'm trying to compete with Mahomes and the Chiefs and Herbert and the Chargers with Harbaugh and Bo Nix and the Broncos, I might lean toward the Cam Ward upside.
I'd also find it extremely funny if they hire Deion, who then drafts Cam Ward.
That would be funny.
I would laugh.
Knowing what I know about Deion, I find it unlikely.
Yes.
But hilarious.
But yes. It was like the Jim Harbaugh thing. He'd spend the entire draft process talking about how Shedeur is the best player he's ever seen, like J.J. McCarthy, and then draft somebody else.
And then it turns out Justin Herbert's the best player he's ever seen.
Right.
Now that has him. I think the defense needs a lot of help. Another edge rusher opposite Max Crosby. Offensive line needs help. Could use another playmaker. Everybody's going to be hoping for T. Higgins. So.
Yeah, which would be a viable option for them. In free agency, potentially, like assuming they let him go. It's, again, we're back to this. Theoretically, having the second most cap space in the NFL is great. You can rebuild. It is, however, a terrible looking free agent class on paper. So that's not helping.
I think teams are going to, we'll talk about it a lot more in the offseason. It's not so much free agency. Teams are going to have to get creative in the trade market. And when new regimes come in and there's valuable players there that maybe they don't want, that's where you have to strike this offseason with fewer free agents.
I mean, Malcolm Kuntz, I think, is scheduled to be a free agent, so keeping some of their own players can be a place where they do spend the money. Like that will be a part of it. You look at some of their upcoming free agents, there are guys that you would presumably want to keep on that roster. Kuntz would maybe be the most obvious one, but like they can spend some money on those guys. But I mean, we talked about Josh Sweat before as an upcoming free agent, someone that you might want to target. It's just not a great year. You're not looking at this saying, that's where I want to allocate $75 million.
So, as I'll say with every team, spin those 8 picks into 12 and start getting younger and, improve that roster.
Big draft for them. Well, they have not necessarily drafted tremendously well for quite a long period of time, and this is a draft where they really need to get it right.
We're just weeks away from fixing every team in 5 minutes, so we'll be going through every team doing this.
Yep.
Good?
Uh-huh.
On our Raiders autopsy.
So we fire Antonio Pierce.
This is more about the cause of death than the fix. You always you're tending to focus more on the fix now.
Yeah,
it's just
because people want to hear.
The fix is coming in February and
People
March.
want to hear how we're going to put it right, how we're going to revive the body. So you're firing
Vrabel
Antonio
and Cam
Pierce,
Ward over
hiring Mike Vrabel, and signing
Vrabel and Cam Ward over Dion and Shedeur.
Yeah, there we go.
And that's how we're going to fix it.
Got it. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.